This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit temptationstreats.com to learn more.
Get ready for Netflix's gripping new medical drama, Pulse. Set in a cutting-edge Miami trauma center, third-year resident Dr. Danny Sims is unexpectedly thrust into a promotion when beloved Chief Resident Dr. Xander Phillips gets suspended. Then, with the emotional and physical stakes at their highest, a storm will push the hospital and its residents to their limits. Witness how life can change in a heartbeat when you're operating under pressure. Watch Pulse, only on Netflix.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I am joined by Ken Katkin, a professor of law at Chase Law School, for our midweek Constitution Show. Ken, welcome to the Constitution Show.
It is great to be back, Trey.
It is. It's always exciting to be doing this. We've been slowly but surely making it through the Constitution. And it boggles my mind how much we have done and produced to get to this point where we're now talking about the 19th Amendment. And so today we're going to be tackling the 19th Amendment. For those of you who don't know, that is a women's right to vote, or suffrage. And there's a lot of really cool things on this front, both historically and in terms of cases. And so what I thought we might start with here, Ken, is just kind of a little bit of a background of what gets us to the 19th Amendment. So as always, we always start with the text of the Constitution. And so the 19th Amendment is a pretty short amendment as these amendments go. And it says this, quote, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation," end quote. And we've seen this pattern now with a number of amendments where we have some new element and then Congress gets some additional powers to enforce that mechanism. And from our point of view, Ken, until recently, I know there have been some voices now calling for the repeal of the 19th Amendment. That might need to be something we talk about a little bit. But until recently, this was a big deal. The 19th Amendment doesn't get ratified. It's hard to kind of believe until 1920. So you don't have women don't have the right to vote until the 1920. As a matter of fact, in a really famous case in Minor v. Happersett back in 1875, before the 19th Amendment, kind of what begins kind of leading in this movement, Virginia Minor, a woman not far from here in Missouri, attempted to register to a vote, asserting that as a U.S. citizen, she had a constitutional right to do so. But the Supreme Court will end up ultimately ruling against her, arguing that while women are citizens, voting is not inherently attached to citizenship status, and instead held that that was going to be individual states had to determine what the right of voting was going to be with women. And so there is this huge advocacy movement that is a part of. And sometimes, generally speaking, we take that back to the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. And that is kind of the beginning of really women asking to be included in the electoral process. And this is where you get activists that some people might be recognized, you might not, like Elizabeth Stanton and Miss Mott, organized some of the first women's rights conventions, including adopting the Declaration of Sentiments, a document that was outlined the grievances and setting an agenda for women's rights. And a central piece of that is, not surprisingly, voting. And some of those moments really occurred with things like bringing for social justice causes. Theologically speaking, this is the beginning of what we call the Sojourners movement in time. it was also deeply tied with abolition and the ending of slavery, although there was some difficulties there. And so there was a variety of strategies employed to try to get to that point. But even the 19th Amendment itself, historically speaking, I mean, again, I'm sure this is stuff that Ken. It's not an easy go. The time from its passage to being ratified is a significant moment. It takes some time, and that's a really big deal. So, Ken, in your case, as a constitutional law scholar, what kind of things do you guys do kind of beyond that history? Obviously, we can go back to Seneca Falls. We can see that the women's movement, its connections with suffrage. On the legal front, I just mentioned minor. Is that one of the cases you guys look at as kind of being?
Yeah,
do you
absolutely.
Look at that kind of case? Okay, yeah, I was wondering about that.
So, and let me just fill in a little bit more background, and then I'll talk about minor. But in the colonial experience in America, before our U.S. Constitution was ratified, women could vote in most states. So when we still had English Crown governing, we still had a strong monarchy, and the role for voting was a little bit more limited. But there weren't really restrictions, but all of the when the states got statehood, all of the state constitutions denied women the vote. So, as you mentioned, by 1848, when the Seneca Falls Convention is held, women are not voting anywhere. And so Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Alice Paul and people like that decided to do something about that.
Well, and since you're going to go back to the colonial period, something that people might.
TaxAct knows small business owners can sometimes use a little help with their taxes. That's why TaxAct has Expert Assist, a team of live tax experts ready to answer any questions you may have. Think of them as your own personal sidekick. Not like one of those funny talking animal sidekicks, more like the super smart nerding out on tax code and business casual attire sidekick, but just as helpful and lovable. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Not know. This is something that even comes up in the Adams family, right? As this moment, right?
Yeah.
So John Adams, he is, part of that constitutional convention. And so, in many ways, I don't know if you've read a lot about this, but there is a lot to suggest that a lot of not just the emotional stability of Adams, but also some of his best writing is the result of the editing of his wife.
Yeah, Abigail Adams.
Abigail Adams clearly was a very sophisticated political woman and partner with Adams. And there's been some interesting historiography studies done. When he's away from her, the documents and things he produces are not of the same quality as when he's with her. And there's some interesting evidence about that. But the moment I want to get to, because you mentioned that, is this idea that states were going to start to deny individual women the right to vote is a shift. And she writes to Adams, her husband, and has this very famous letter. If you haven't, for listeners, the letters between John Adams, Abigail Adams are some of the most fascinating letters that we have historically. I highly recommend, even if you don't read them, there are several books about their letters that kind of go through some of the highlights. Really highly recommend that, taking a look at that. But she has what we now think of as being the famous "Remember the Ladies" quote. And what she's basically telling Adams is, she's being very serious, for those of you who read it, look, every man would be as terrible to women if he could. And she goes a pretty step further and says, and that's the same way it is with masters and slaves. In other words, the same evils that we see with the ownership of black people would be the same kind of evalities that we would see with men towards women. And it's what's particularly funny about John Adams' response to Abigail is, like in any marriage that you don't want to have a fight, he he takes a very serious set of claims that she brings forward and makes it a joke and basically goes, oh, well, you'd have me worry about a petticoat revolution. And he tries to kind of downplay that so that he doesn't have to address the underlying truth that they're disenfranchising women in a meaningful way at that moment. And it's not unbeknownst. And another little interesting factoid, because I love Abigail Adams. I'm sorry, I'm going to talk too long about this.
Absolutely.
Do you know that Abigail Adams actually had her own money and bank, even in an era when you weren't able to do that?
I did not know that.
Yes. So she kept money apart from John Adams, the money that she had earned. And John, obviously, he could have stopped her, but didn't. So obviously, to some extent, must have recognized that. But nevertheless, she was protesting by the very fact that she was doing something that was quasi illegal. And not only that, she then she had her own will, which was something else that would be unique, right? And all of her money only went to her female descendants. And she tells us why. She basically says, I know that the men in my family will be taken care of, but I want women to not have to be at the whims of a particular marriage. I want them to do what I did. I want them to marry for love. And the only way that's possible is if you're an independent financial woman. And so I'm just going to give money to my granddaughters, not to everybody. Well, I have to pause myself right there because that comes to the end of the midweek supporters exclusive preview. So if you want to get the rest of this show, that means you're going to have to become a supporter of the Politics Guys. So if you head down to the show notes or if you head to politicsguys.com/support, you can see all the different levels of support available to you. And that includes getting our midweek supporters exclusive show. And I'd love for you to do that. So again, head down there into the show notes, click through on that link, or head to politicsguys.com/support. You get all other kinds of really cool benefits when you become a member of the Politics Guys, including like access to me on our Discord group. There's all different kinds of things. So again, head to politicsguys.com/support. It's also helpful if you share, rate, and subscribe to episodes. I need to give a special thanks to our special executive producers of the Politics Guys, who are Wilmer Marino, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Kathy Anderson, and Jeremy Larson. Thank you all so much for being an executive producer. We'll be back with a new full episode this weekend on Saturday. I hope you'll join us then.